So my presentation is on translating the findings into curricular content to accompany the games. I just want to outline for you a little bit about the context in which the curricula was developed. There are many visions of anti-violence learning resources emerging in an increasingly interconnecting world. In this context, it appears apt to ask the question, what do teacher educators need to know and what resources do they need in order to actively build community among teacher educators around the world? Innovative educational strategies which recognize the changing world we live within and engage young people in creating norms that address intersectional inequalities, support nonviolence, promote social responsibility, and foster equitable relationships are crucial if we are to achieve lasting change. Through a participatory and collaborative approach to co-creating globally relevant and inclusive learning activities that teachers and teacher educators can use to engage young people and/or explore how to engage young people with challenging gender-based violence constructively, we have developed the focus of this curricula. The learning design is situated in a vision of global teacher education that embeds the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDGs 3, 4, 5, 10, 16, and 17. For example, situated in the principles of SDGs 3, 4, and 5, we focus on the holistic development of young people, the enhancement of their skills, knowledge, attitude, and capability, rooted in their lived experience for the prevention of child sexual abuse in Jamaica, responsive to the Jamaican National Health and Family Life Education Policy, gender bias in India, aligned with the Indian National Education Policy 2020, child marriage in Uganda, connected to the Ugandan National Sexuality Education Framework 2018, and abusive behavior in relationships in the UK, associated with the British National Relationships Education, Relationships and Sex Education, and Health Education statutory guidance. We frame the design of these activities in schemes of work that can be integrated into the national curriculum for secondary schools and flexibly adapted as standalone education for social justice resources by educators and teacher educators globally. Subject to the completion of ongoing trials of the Ni3 pro-social games for the prevention of gender-based violence that these resources accompany, this can be downloaded for free from the Ni3 website. In terms of approach, the schemes of work were developed between January 2020 and September 2021 through an iterative process of stakeholders consultation to ensure that the activities were transferable, sustainable, replicable, adaptable, and maintained purposeful context relevance for educators and teacher educators. The scheme of work activities are cost-effective and rooted in democratic and social justice principles that are centered on strengthening the voice, visibility, and agency of young people in an empowering and enabling process of learning. The objective is to contribute to conditions for teacher education and education to develop an inclusive, equitable, ethical provision of teaching practice in a safe and boundaried learning process. So in terms of methods that were used to inform the framework, the development of the framework for the anti-violence learning resources involved consultation with country experts and stakeholders to identify themes and issues, review of empirical research carried out by the Ni3 Center, review of wider literature, mapping of framework against country policy and legislation, preparatory and feedback work for access into schools. The methodological approach taken for the creation of curricula consists of an iterative and collaborative review process for developing both curriculum framework and curriculum design and content. The approach involved eliciting feedback and validation from the Ni3 Center directors, project research teams, project games design team, country advisors, country directors, and country teams, government stakeholders, and country curriculum specialists. Country team feedback and validation contributed to the initial scheme of work design based on the plot line for the 4 video games, with particular attention given to facilitating how teachers could use the game alongside the curriculum materials to link activities with each chapter of the game. The integration of Ni3 qualitative and quantitative research findings to inform the design and content, and the revised version responsive to curriculum specialist feedback was also really important in shaping the development of the curricula. In terms of quantitative research findings that emerged through the research studies conducted by the Ni3 Center, these survey research findings shape the context for the design of curricula. For example, in the Ugandan context, findings revealed that the frequency of maltreatment and exposure to violence, all forms, within and outside the home, is high amongst both boys and girls. Almost 2/3 of children had experienced 2 or more types of maltreatment within the home and or outside the home, which consisted of corporal punishment, physical abuse, non-contact sexual abuse, contact sexual abuse, emotional neglect and abuse, physical neglect, and medication neglect. So consideration has been given to effects of this on children and young people's holistic development whilst designing the curriculum to facilitate the prevention of child marriage. In India, with regards to exposure to violence within the home, quantitative findings showed that children were most likely to report witnessing verbal violence, followed by physical violence and serious violent threat. Boys and girls were similarly likely to report exposure to these forms of violence. There was a small gender difference in empathy towards female victims of interpersonal violence, with girls reporting slightly higher levels of both affective and cognitive empathy. Therefore, the curriculum on the prevention of gender bias as a form of gender-based violence was centered on ensuring inclusivity across diversity and reinforcing the understanding that learning about gender bias and gender-based violence is relevant for everyone. The curriculum focused on the importance of developing a learning process that enabled all diverse students in the target age group to recognize how gender bias and gender-based violence affects everyone in inclusive sessions, so that no child or young person would feel alienated, vulnerable, and offended by discussions and activities. In terms of the qualitative research findings, the Ni3 qualitative research findings contributed to the content of the schemes of work. For example, in the Jamaican qualitative research study findings, we developed understanding of ways in which negative cultural perceptions and myths can normalize child sexual abuse and contribute to risk. This shaped the development of scheme of work activities to facilitate critical understanding of and reflection on contributory factors to child sexual abuse. In the UK context, research findings, for instance, exploring warning signs for an unhealthy, abusive relationship, shaped the aims and activities for developing critical awareness of different types of perpetrator behaviors. Drawing on these research findings, the theoretical lens that was utilized to develop the resources was really shaped by an interdisciplinary youth-centered approach that draws on and combines critical pedagogy, creative and performing arts, an ecological framework for human development, and integrative and intercultural therapeutic practice. We embed critical pedagogy in learning activities to develop critical awareness and enable reflection and action for change within self and others based on a range of factors, such as recognition of stressors and developing emotional resilience, coping strategies, help-seeking behavior, problem-solving skills, and care for self and others. We integrate creative and performing arts to enhance self-expression, co-creation, and multimodal ways of noticing, expressing, and challenging lived realities, and to build awareness, reflection, and potential for transformation. Applying an ecological framework for human development to learning design created space for the exploration of interconnections, interdependence, and independence in challenging inequalities through activities. Integrative and intercultural therapeutic practice is drawn on to facilitate sustainable well-being and develop self in relation to other understanding. That's empathy. To function and live in constructive and fulfilling ways with and in diversity. In terms of application, the design and content of the schemes of work received positive feedback from national curriculum specialists, teacher educators, and teachers in India and the UK. It also received positive consideration regarding integration into the secondary school curriculum from the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in Jamaica, and is being considered for integration by Ministry of Education and Sports in Uganda. In terms of the response from country directors, I have a few just synopses captured here of their words, and also some feedback comments that were received on drafts of the scheme of works across the 4 countries. So, for example, our country co-director from India said, I believe the scheme of work activities for India have great potential to act as a support within the education field, from the perspective of the activities being engaging, interactive, and inclusive. A combination that will allow for more meaningful conversations around complex issues of gender-based violence to take place within a classroom. Our country director from Ni3, Jamaica, shared that the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information is looking forward to our contribution to the curriculum. And in Uganda, colleagues shared that the schemes of work will be a helpful resource in guiding teachers on how to use a pro-social video game. From the wider community, we received feedback such as, this is an important piece of work expounding on critical areas for child marriage. The activities you have mentioned are very thought-provoking. We can most definitely translate some in an attractive, tangible game. This encourages students and provides them with the opportunity to be active participants while the teacher acts as a facilitator. Collaborative learning is employed throughout. Students are allowed to speak freely and to share their experiences. Critical thinking becomes evident. Creativity is encouraged. This will be very empowering for young people to be able to speak openly in a safe place. In terms of moving forward, transferability and sustainability of this learning design, when implemented by diverse facilitators with different young people's needs in varied contexts, needs to be assessed to ascertain its effectiveness in retaining adaptable, context-relevant replicability, shaped by a variety of lived experiences and realities. In a global context for lifelong learning, it would be good to further explore its integration in global teacher education provision that places an emphasis on collaborative online learning and embedding of well-being, self-care, justice, and social responsibility issues in teaching and learning practice. So thank you very much for listening, and this brings me to the end of my presentation.